wrong with your screen. I bought a new light because my other one broke, and as it turns out, oh here, look, I can kind of make a scary, like Halloween face. Anyways, it's not portable, and I didn't notice until I got it home, and can only live stream by the river. I don't know if you guys can see the stars, probably not. But yeah, I am literally in the middle of the jungle on an island in the dark, live streaming right now to you. So that little green thing is there. I can still see the chat. That's me. Hi. Uh, so I wanted to do this stream tonight because my life was always ever since as long as I can remember, my life has always been about trying to ascertain whether or not there was more to the universe, and I was always quite certain that there was. And I feel like I've been really blessed to have decent metacognition skills, so self awareness and pretty solid critical thinking skills. And I have never abandoned skepticism, no matter how much I wanted to believe something. So I feel like I was endowed with a good skill set to get out there and create a metaphysical model that actually had some basis in truth, that had some real substance. Um, and I feel like I've been lucky enough to experience on numerous occasions, telepathy, precognition, particularly telepathy, like with 100% certainty. And I'll give you guys those examples and tell you those stories. So let's see, precognition, and then synchronicity on a level that is baffling, absolutely baffling. And um, during at the peak of sort of, I guess, my phoenix process is what I call it, but the my awakening, or I hate to use that word, but you guys know what I mean. At the peak of that process, the synchronicities were actually happening in startling ways, and with groups of people around, which was really, really helpful because I have enough self awareness to know that subjective experience is questionable at best, and so. Um, and so I guess let's talk about a couple of the most compelling stories that I have of ESP type phenomena. Um, I guess we should start with my mom's suicide, because the day that she committed suicide, I was out to lunch in Peru with a friend of mine, and I just, in the middle of lunch, I said, I got to call my mom. I'm worried she's going to hang herself. And I used those words. I didn't just say commit suicide. And so when we got back to the hotel, we were there for maybe 20 minutes. And I got a message from my stepfather, or actually from the worker first. And my stepfather called later. But my mom had asked him to go get some milk. And when he came back, she was dead in the barn. And so I knew not only more or less the moment that she did it, but I also knew the method. And and I had someone with me, that I spoke these things to out loud. So there's absolutely no question, and it is true that my mother had threatened to kill herself on many occasions throughout my life. Starting when I was a toddler, but she had not made any reference to suicide in many, many, many years. Partly because I didn't really give her the opportunity. We didn't talk much. So I find that particular instance to be really, really compelling. And another one that is somehow weirdly connected to my mom, a few months before my mother committed suicide, I was actually on the toilet at work, and well, sort of at work. Work, if you can call it that. Do you think you know how to achieve ego death or to get its benefits without psychedelics or near death experience? Um, well, we'll get to that in a moment for sure. We're going to get to NDEs because they are actually one of the most interesting of the sort of like the phenomena that suggests that our consciousness is not actually hardwired to the brain, that the brain is not necessary to support consciousness, because there have been several people that have been dead for remarkably long periods, and they were able to, recount conversations that were very far away, that they couldn't possibly have heard if they were indeed in their body. And so that's a really interesting area because it presents some of the best evidence that we have that there's something to that. And so the Robin Williams, right? Robin Williams, I never think about him. I've never particularly been a Robin Williams fan. In fact, I always found him kind of annoying. So it's not like I ever thought about Robin Williams. It was, I just never ever thought about Robin Williams. You guys like my lighting? Stream is lit, greenish. Um, and so I just had this thought. I wonder what Robin Williams is doing right now. And 2 hours later, my girlfriend at the time showed up, and she said, Williams hung himself today. Now, Robin Williams was my mother's favorite comedian. And so it strikes me as incredibly weird that I knew the moment that Robin Williams hung himself. At least I thought about him for absolutely no reason. And I also knew a few months later, it was maybe 6 months later, the moment that my mother committed suicide. And so, I mentioned that in part to demonstrate that these things are not random. There seems to be, thank you, Marzi, there seems to be a deeper level of connectivity. And it's sort of difficult to articulate this, but the way that I think about it is that when you are at ground zero with this sort of spiritual or metaphysical stuff, um, its characteristics are more pronounced and more easily identifiable. Another good example of this is like lyrics and poetry. The people that are working from the place of the most depth tend to have a lot of lyrics that have layers and layers of meaning. And that is one of the ways that I have always sort of evaluated the depth of art or an artist. If you know one of almost I feel like the watermark of divinity, or when the stuff is coming from that greater mind, that's sort of one of the earmarks, I guess is the word that I'm looking for, is that sort of multi-layered uh meaning that it almost can be too complex and marvelous to believe that a human being intentionally devised it. You know what I mean? Um, Speaking of lyrics, the one of the best examples of precognition that I am aware of, yeah, Led Zeppelin. I don't care if they got canceled. I don't like all of Led Zeppelin's material. I like the Lord of the Rings kind of stuff, the Battle of Evermore and that kind of. But at any rate, one of the best examples of precognition, I think, one of the most incontrovertibly weird examples that I'm aware of is Fear Inoculum by Tool. They hadn't made an album in I think 18 years or so, 13 years, I guess it was, and I think it was about 6 months before COVID hit, and the title track of that CD or that album is about a pandemic that causes people to distance themselves from each other, not just physically, but also it causes this fear. It sounds like it was written after COVID, but it was in fact written before COVID. Um, so that I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that at some point in the stream, because it really is remarkable, and I think also it's sort of beneficial when this stuff happens in the public eye. Oh no, you know what, you guys, it's going to be really hard for me to block. Hold on, I can do it actually. Let's see. Report pornography report. Yeah, so absolutely love it when this stuff happens, where millions of people can see it happening. Um and by the way, Maynard was actually asked about that, and people, my ex, yeah, it was that girl. It totally was that girl. Yep, she's the one that came and said Robin Williams. Anyways, so yeah, Maynard was asked about that, and he said, what I have thought for many years about this kind of stuff, that the subconscious mind is constantly observing and mapping all sorts of patterns in our everyday life, in the cycles of time, in matter, in the structure of, the Fibonacci sequence that it's seeing everywhere. And so, he said that the subconscious mind is always extending its, your conscious observations out in all sorts of different directions according to this fundamental mathematical structure. And so that's how these precognitions actually happen. And I think that's absolutely it, you know. So in the description, I was mentioning that we can actually find a scientific basis for a lot of this phenomena and understand why it's not woo, how it can happen. You know what I mean? There always is a physical basis that facilitates anything that happens on this plane of existence, right? You're never going to do anything impossible. Woo is woo, it's not real. But it's also true that things happen that are beyond the matrix mind, deterministic, reductionist model, but they have mechanisms of action that facilitate them. You know what I mean? And so, for example, long range telepathy bothered me for a long time. Um, the first time that I was really confronted with this, like, super, super hard, where there was no getting around it, and it may have been the first time that I experienced telepathy that was, like, impossibly, there's just no way in hell that it was a coincidence. My girlfriend at the time, and no, this wasn't my ex third eye. This is, well, she is my ex, but it's a different girl. She experienced a tremendous amount of this crazy rabbit hole stuff with me. Uh, and so we were in Telluride, Colorado at a fish concert, but we didn't go into the fish concert. We were just in Telluride and there was a fish concert happening. And so I was going to stay in town for some reason, and she went up on top of a mountain in the back of a pickup truck to go and see if they could hear the show from up high. And so she was like a mile away from where I was. And yes, I think only very smart and mentally high performing people should take psychedelics. As Terence McKenna said, stupid psychedelics don't work on stupid people, and they have a much higher potential for adverse effects because they may lack critical thinking skills. They may be predisposed to delusion. So the smarter you are, the more purpose it's going to serve for you to take psychedelics. Now, if you're very grounded and maybe not that bright, it is actually possible that psychedelics could permanently increase your intelligence. It has been established in clinical research that it absolutely does happen. And psilocybin, for example, drastically increases memory. So, memory and intelligence are definitely connected. So, yeah. So she goes up on top of the mountain, and I went walking up the road in a different direction to the peak of a different mountain to just sort of go and meditate. And I had this conversation in my mind that I was of the opinion at the time was just imaginary. Like it was just like a, I didn't think it was real, but it was a conversation between myself and another person that I was thinking was like a hypothetical thing. And as I was walking back to my car, I stumbled across a Burmese mountain dog and I stopped and petted him. And then I realized I was cold and I went to the car and I was really pissed off because I didn't have the keys and couldn't get in. And oh, and I missed after the dog. I think a tear ran down my eye because of something I was thinking about. And then after I waited by the car for a while, and I was like, damn it, man, I have to go try to find her. It's Telluride. It's 12,000 feet, freezing cold. So I go looking for my girlfriend, and she walks up, and she's like crying a little bit, and she starts just the entire conversation that was going on in my head, every single word verbatim. I mean, between me and this other imaginary person, every single word, and then everything I did. She said, and then you saw that dog and you stopped and petted him, and a tear ran down your eye, and then you went to the car, and I realized that I had the keys and you couldn't get in to get your clothes, and that's why I came down. And I was like, holy crap, man. It was mind blowing. She knew every word of this like imaginary conversation that went through my head. And word for word. And so I realized right away that I had a problem, because I had always believed that telepathy probably happens. I mean, I've heard enough stories of, like, mothers whose child got into some kind of accident or died even, and they just knew right away that something had happened. I had witnessed it with mothers and young children a few times, where it was like pretty undeniable. My son does it a lot, but that's been more recent. So, at the time, I had this idea that brainwaves somehow facilitated telepathy, right? And it makes sense because a radio can pick up radio waves, and then you can hear the music. It's not out of the question that that our brains could pick up the brain waves of other people and translate them and understand it. And it turns out, in fact, that our brain is absolutely loaded with magnetite. And so, that magnetite functions as the probably the generator, I would imagine. But certainly it could function as an antenna to receive the brain waves of other people and animals. But the question of long range telepathy still bothers me to this day. I had it with my current partner. When I flew back to the United States, we were separated by, I mean, I don't know, I was in Virginia, and she was in Ecuador, and we barely knew each other at this point. I mean, we hadn't even kissed. Um, I'm not sure what you mean, third eye, right? Well, I mean, yeah, okay. Well, we'll get to that too if we have time. I really need to watch the time because I have a client call tonight. By the way, you guys, do me a favor, hit the like button, share, subscribe, support us on Patreon. I get no money because we're demonetized, so subscriber support is all we get. There are options in the description to support us. Also, I want to thank you guys for like 200 subscribers in the last 28 days, and we might hit 30,000 views for the first time ever on this channel. So it looks like we're actually starting to get some traction, which is really great because, I put a lot of effort into this channel for a lot of years, and it's been an uphill battle because once you get demonetized, the algorithm deprioritizes you. How do you know that you're smart enough to safely take this stuff? But if you're not smart enough, though, how can you prime yourself mentally and your IQ? Okay, I'll make a mental note and let me finish this thought, and I'll try to address that. But the long range telepathy bothers me. It still bothers me. And what I was saying is that I was in Virginia and she was in South America, and we barely knew each other, hadn't even kissed. So I was sitting on the couch thinking, well, she's definitely not the type to ever get married. And my phone beeps, and she's like, I'm starting to feel differently about marriage. And it was just like that, like, maybe 25 seconds. And, one instance of that, you might say, like, okay, well, that was a coincidence, but it happened two or three times in the space of a week, So I think with consistency, that's part of the scientific method. If something is consistent, then that's considered evidence. Um, so, this thing of like long range telepathy, uh, bothered me because my original hypothesis that alpha waves and magnetite in the brain, easy explanation. I don't see why science should even have a problem with this. But then the long range telepathy thing, and then when my mom committed suicide and I knew that she had done it, and the method, I was in Peru, she was in Ecuador, so hundreds of miles, and definitely not in the same room or something of that nature. So um but we have entanglement, and so we know that all of the electrons in the universe, for example, that have ever been entangled are always entangled. So on some level, we have all these fundamental constituent energetic parts of our being that are connected to all of these other parts. We still have a lot of work to do in terms of sorting out um, you know how is it filtered. It's like, okay, so all of the electrons in the universe are connected at some fundamental level, but then how is it filtered so that information coming from one individual person is received by the other person over thousands and thousands of miles, even if there's entanglement? It's still an interesting question. And, I mean, there's still mysteries that we have to plumb the depths of. But, I think at least if you take into consideration what entanglement implies, and you consider, in the case of short range telepathy, magnetite and brain waves, we at least have some physical basis and some seed of understanding as to how these things can manifest. Okay, and so now I had a question about how can you know if your IQ is high enough to take psychedelics, and how do you prep and prime yourself for it? um, IQ is not really the primary concern if you're considering using psychedelic medicine. The primary concern is your mental health history, and your ancestral mental health. Going back to at least your grandparents, uncles and aunts are also, you know, uh, you need to look at that as well, although it's not as immediate as like if your mom is schizophrenic, you may have problems if you take LSD. However, I have witnessed several schizophrenic people consume several different psychedelics without any problems whatsoever. I'm not advising that anyone that is schizophrenic does that. I'm just saying I've seen that it can be fine. But the primary thing is your mental state. And in terms of preparation, you need to have your life somewhat in order. If you have warrants out for your arrest, and you have bills that are overdue, and the landlord is coming to throw you out any minute now, um, you had better address those things before you try to take LSD. Uh, so you have to have your life somewhat in order. You need to have a clear idea of why you're taking it, what you hope to accomplish, what you wish to gain from it. So, in short, that's probably sufficient. Uh, so, okay, so where have we worked our way through? Some telepathy experiences. I mean, something even happened with our dog today. This dog has never been to a vet before. No way that it knows what a vet is. We literally rescued it off the street. It was a skeleton. We removed bot fly larvae from its fur all over its back, and the dog. We're gonna post a video soon. The dog was on death's door, and so we nursed it back to health, and then it started limping today. So we had to take it to the vet. And as we were leaving for the first time ever, that dog would not come with us. It's never been to a vet before, never heard the word vet before. It was just an abused street dog. No one's taken it to the vet. And it ran under the house when it was time for us to leave to go to the vet, even though, never been, couldn't ever have heard about it even. Really, really wild thing to witness, man, that this dog, and you could say, well, it sensed it, but aren't you saying it was telepathic then? I mean, I don't really see what the difference is, especially when you're talking about something this specific, and the dog has had no prior experience. Are you on the coast on South America? I heard it's nice there. I have, well, recently we were on the coast in Ecuador. Right now, I'm on the banks of the Napo River, which is the largest tributary of the Amazon. Maybe about a 6-hour boat ride up from the mouth of the Amazon. Um, okay, so I I also want to talk about precognition. We started talking about precognition with the Tool song and those lyrics, and how he said that he felt that it was just a matter of the subconscious mind constantly making patterns and extending them, in all sorts of directions. By the way, if you're just tuning in and you're wondering why I'm in the dark, uh, I bought a new light today and it is not portable. So I am in the jungle in the dark on the banks of a river. And that's my microphone light that you can see kind of illuminating my face a little bit. It's the best I can do at the moment. Um, but precognition, and I want to give you guys an example of something that happened with me, when I was really at the height of sort of the Phoenix process, um, and I knew, like, it had become really clear to me that I legitimately had some kind of parapsychological capacities. That I had engaged capacities of consciousness that we aren't so sure about as a society yet. I was sure of that. So I was at home one day and I had this overwhelming feeling, like I had a literal vision of like brown muddy water flooding through my we'll talk about that again in a moment. Brown muddy water flooding, but I noticed it was the desert, right? And I lived in the foothills of the Rockies, kind of in like high altitude desert, so it wasn't, totally wrong, but I did notice it didn't seem quite right. But, this voice was like, there's going to be a flood and lots of people are going to die. And it was like, I looked out the window and it was like gaining, big black storm clouds were forming and it looked gnarly out there. And I thought, man, this is ridiculous. But it's not going to kill me to drive up into I was like an hour from the high country in Silverton, Colorado. So I got a tent and some fishing poles, put them all in the car, grabbed my girlfriend, drove way up to the peaks of the Rockies, and it rained a little bit. And I was like, man, I knew this was stupid. And I went home. The next day, I went to the gas station and I saw the front page of the newspaper, and there was this flood that was exactly what I had seen in my mind's eye. And the death toll eventually would reach 1,000. It was in Pakistan. Um, so, and this is why initiation is important. This is why developing a skill set in regards to this stuff is important. Learning to, identify a wish demon versus actual intuition is important. So I feel like I did have a correct precognition, but then I made up my own narrative about it happening where I was. Nothing about the vision really said that. But I just thought, like, why would I have this precognition if it wasn't relevant to me? And so now, what I would do if I had that sort of precognition and it was really, really powerful and accompanied with, one of the ways that I test these things is that you'll get kind of a tingle in your body, particularly in the left arm, in my case. Um, and, you sit down and breathe and really like meditate and become like a hollow tube to bring down fire from heaven so we can figure out what exactly is actually being received or communicated. Right. But at the time, I didn't have that much experience. So, I just not really panicked, but I reacted. And it was fine. It was nice to go up and sit up in the mountains. I let my dog out and he ran around and there's no harm done. That's another thing, when we're learning to use our intuition on this level, we really have to keep ourselves in check. And, it's almost like when people engage in S&M and they have safe words. You need to have like occult safety words, and that's basically like setting boundaries, the same exact idea, setting boundaries so that you don't make the mistake that every magician makes, which is to think that his magic can do more for him than it can, or she, or they, or whatever your pronouns happen to be. Um, yeah, so like I said, in that case, no harm done. But it was a powerful lesson to see that. I mean, the chances that I would just randomly have this powerful vision of a flood and this narrator saying, lots of people are going to die. And at that very moment, it was happening. It was absolutely happening, but in Pakistan, not in Colorado. So, we have to develop the skills and the objectivity and the neutrality and to be in touch with the body and our feelings. Well, not so, in this case, not so much emotions. In the case of objective evaluation of precognition, you actually want to keep your emotions at bay and sort of keep them. you know, at arm's length until you are sure what is going on. Okay, so that covers precognition, at least the important parts of it. By the way, if you guys want to see a really, really interesting example of possible prophecy, read the introduction to the Book of the Law by Aleister Crowley. Um, the four adorations. I can't even remember what that is, honestly. I know that um, I've encountered it's like Buddhist or something. I'm not it's not really clear to me at the moment. Um, what was I saying though? Precognition and clarity. Oh yeah, the Book of the Law. The introduction to the Book of the Law has some of the most remarkably, um, I guess prescient, prophetical writing that anyone's encountered. I think professional skeptics that have dismissed Nostradamus and Edgar Casey and all these people that have been confronted with the Book of the Law say things like interesting but not conclusive. And the reason is that in the Book of the Law he talks about how fascism is coming, basically. Democracy daughters, communism cackles crazily, cavorting around the globe. They are hemming us in. And he talks about how there's going to be all this censorship. And then, there's reference to take wine and strange drugs and know me thereof. And we're living in an era where people are smoking DMT and drinking ayahuasca and talking to entities all the time. And probably the weirdest thing is he says that one of the ways that we'll know that the aeon has truly shifted is that people will become more epicene and bisexual. And epicene means of indeterminate sex. So what are all your pronouns out there? You know what I mean? It is incredible how much of that the writing it's so specific and succinct, and the timeline is there. All of the qualifiers that prophetical writing generally doesn't have that allows skeptics to dismiss it, it's all there in this case. Um, so I had another question I just noticed in the chat about whether psychedelics are meant to be used in Ecuador. Psychedelics are meant to be used wherever they're needed. I do feel like taking ayahuasca here in the Amazon rainforest is an important experience, but what this medicine teaches and the healing that it provides for people should not be limited to one geographical area. I think also that the equator is the greatest density of light is here, right? And I also believe that that's why there's such great biodiversity. The light is refracted at its most dense point, and so all matter, including living creatures, are light in a standing wave fundamentally. So it's like the light hits the equator, and because it's at its most dense concentration, it creates this ring of rainbow around the planet. Physically manifested. Um, and because our consciousness has its roots in the electromagnetic wave and light, I think there's definitely something about opening up your consciousness and exposing uh, your your microcosm, your microcosmic consciousness to the greater universal mind, where the light is at its most dense. It's definitely going to be impactful. So the answer to that question is yes and no. And you're asking, do Ecuadorians take psychedelics? In general, no, but that's because of Catholicism. Um, Ecuador is closer to space in the sense that the equator protrudes the furthest on a sphere. It's like the outer rim. I mean, maybe that's what's meant by that. We also have 22,000-foot mountains, so you can get pretty high up into almost into outer space in Ecuador without leaving the planet. Um, but we have like 72 or more indigenous cultures here, and a lot of them use ayahuasca, but there's a lot of misconceptions as well. The ayahuasca industry created group ayahuasca ceremonies. That's not traditional for 90% of the ayahuasca using tribes here. By the way, ayahuasca originally, the alkaloids in it were called telepathine and telepamine for a reason. They're now called tetrahydroharmine and harmaline and harmala. Uh, but their original names were telepamine and telepathine, and for good reason. It is absolutely, absolutely true. And I have told this story so many times on this channel, I'm hesitant to repeat it again, although context almost insists upon it. But it's not what I'm saying about that is that indigenous people don't just all drink ayahuasca. It's the shaman drinks ayahuasca, and then he would use his ability to read your energetic grid, basically, and also to communicate directly with your DNA. One of the ways that this works is that biophotons, which are tiny little packets of light that contain information, are showering out of our DNA, and uh, all living tissue that contains DNA is emitting biophotons at the rate of, I think it's 100 per second per square centimeter. And research has been done and it's been confirmed that it contains information that cells, even across species, can understand. So it's very likely that that is how ayahuasca was discovered in the first place. And it's one of the ways that a shaman is able to do his job, because when you drink ayahuasca and you go out into the jungle, your filters have been removed on your nervous system, and so you're more receptive to other people's thoughts. Um, you can actually close your eyes and see through your pineal gland when you drink ayahuasca. A lot of times, because it has rods and cones and is connected to the visual neocortex, and so it literally is an eye. In fact, a friend of mine suggested that when you close your eyes, you can still see, and sometimes you have eidetic visuals where you're actually having like visions, if you eat mushrooms, or sometimes just daydreaming. Um, that's what's happening, that you're looking out of your pineal gland, and it's totally realistic. But it is true that when you drink ayahuasca, sometimes you can see through it, which is an experience that I had once. And then when I went downstairs the next morning, the shaman, the first thing he said to me was, sometimes you can see through your forehead when you drink the medicine, which was, I drank ayahuasca with this guy like 20 times at that point. It's not like that's the kind of thing he would say all the time. Normally it would say, "How did you sleep?" or something. You know what I mean? It was not. Sometimes you can see through your forehead when you drink the medicine, which connected the experience back to telepathy, right? So, somebody, and I'm also mentioning that because someone asked earlier, is your third eye involved in this stuff? It absolutely is, at least based on that experience that I had. But what I was saying is that your filters are down when you take ayahuasca and other psychedelics, but I think particularly with DMT, I think DMT and ayahuasca remove those filters almost completely. So you're basically like immersed in the eternal, infinite consciousness without any sort of mitigating influences. The filters, the what did Huxley call it? The um, reducing valve in our consciousness. A lot of people attribute that to Terence McKenna, but it actually was Huxley. We still have a little bit of time. I have a 10:15 appointment, and I'm going to be doing my appointment with my client like this too. This little green light. It's a little bit sketchy too, honestly. I mean, I walked out here through the jungle with like lying branches, and there are Dos Equis and all kinds of venomous things out here. Somebody spotted an anaconda pretty close by too. They're harmless though, unless you're a tapir or a capybara or something. Um, so yeah, I mean, we have. Yeah, the jaguars are not really too much of a problem. Although last year in a Yampe, a jaguar actually was videoed walking through town. This is a beach town. It's one of my favorite places in the world too. If you're ever in Ecuador, definitely go to a Yampe. We may have retreats there soon. By the way, we are still booking the retreat in April, um, and maybe the beginning of May at Ngaru, which is like ayahuasca Stonehenge. It's an incredible property. We only have a few openings. It's not going to be a very small group. So if you're interested in that, send me an email. Please do hit the like button, share, subscribe, support us on Patreon or via one of the options in the description. Um, Subscribe, hit the bell notification so you don't miss anything. Okay, so where were we at here? We talked about ayahuasca and telepathy, which is a real thing, and people will laugh like, ah ha ha, yeah, right, you're high on psychedelics, you think you're telepathic. No, Masters in Houston, PhD, did controlled experiments with 1,000 subjects in 1963. They wrote a book called The Varieties of Psychedelic Experience, and they absolutely proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that ayahuasca reliably induces telepathy. Also, remote viewing. Shamans in the deep jungle have been able to describe the Eiffel Tower, street corners of China. You know what I mean? They've definitely had never left the jungle. There were no TVs in the jungle at the time. We're talking about old anthropological records here. So, and this is something else that I've mentioned on this channel a lot, but probably the most important discovery in the area of consciousness, period. And one of the greatest discoveries in humanity's history, I think. Um, yeah, of course, your cells can listen to your thoughts. Our cells are definitely intelligent. The intelligence of the cell is a long accepted biological fact at this point. Um, if who was using the Stargate? I'm using the Stargate. What the hell was I talking about though? We were getting somewhere. It was important. Damn you guys in your chat box. No, I do like it. I'm not trying to discourage anyone. It's one of the best parts of live streaming is to interact, but it occasionally does cause me to forget what the hell I was talking about. Um, the most important discoveries in the history of humanity, really, and certainly in the area of neuroscience, and it has totally been ignored. And that is the fact that we know with absolute certainty that brain is not required in order for us to have consciousness. Um, there's actually a guy on TikTok right now that has this condition where he has absolutely no brain, and he's getting better. He's not growing any new brain, but he's getting better. Like, think about that. And then there are three cases, at least three cases, because I read this article in Scientific American in like, man, I was maybe in high school or in my early 20s. Yeah, I got it. I'm back on track now. There's a lag, so your comments also come in like minutes after. So that's another reason I get kind of jumbled and I'm not sure what you guys are referencing because I get your comments like 6 minutes after you send them. Um, So there have been at least three cases where people were totally functional. They had absolutely no brain. The spinal cord ends in a sac of cranial fluid. There is no brain. And the one guy was a doctor, and he went to the to get scans because he had a headache that wouldn't go away, and he was worried he had brain cancer. So he goes to the hospital. They scan his brain. He has no brain, none at all. Like no brain. He is a fucking doctor. So, that in my opinion should have sent like massive shockwaves through the entire scientific and religious everything. Like, you know what I mean? That shit should have been on Fox News, CNN, like it should have been everywhere. It should have been like landing on the moon or something because that's a big fucking deal. All of a sudden to be 100% certain that consciousness is not dependent upon a brain. Now, it is important to remember that the brain clearly usually has some sort of really fundamental purpose in relation to our cognition. I mean, in a lot of cases, if you hit in the head with a brick and your skull caves in and your brain is damaged, you're gonna have a bad day. You're gonna have brain damage. You know what I mean? Paralysis. Well, you know what I mean? Like you guys know the story, but um, all that matters in this case is the fact that if even a single person was fully cognizant with no fucking brain, that's a huge big deal. You know what I mean? That's a massive thing. And so that happened. And then, the other element of that is, basically equally important is these near death experiences where, people have fallen off of a cliff or whatever. And this one woman, I think she is the most like crazy example of this. But she was dead for 45 minutes, which, she should have had severe brain damage and she didn't. Um, but she was driven away in the ambulance, and she knew what the people that were on the cliff back behind where she had fallen off were talking about word for word while she was dead, like a mile and a half away in an ambulance. So you know what I mean. There we have proof that there is consciousness with zero brain activity. You know what I mean? We're not talking about the last 3 minutes where there's still brain activity after death. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about 45 minutes and long, 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 long ways away. So, and that's not the only case. I mean, there's a whole shit ton of them at this point. Um, and this kind of stuff makes people paranoid. People are going like, okay, well, if we have all this evidence, is it a conspiracy? Is every scientist, every neuroscientist out there, trying to cover up the fact that consciousness is whatever? No, it's not that. It's not that. Um, it has more to do with anchoring bias. It has to do with fear. It has to do with selective perception. It has a lot to do with indoctrination. You got to remember what training really is. When you are taught to think within a certain parameter and a subset within a subset within a subset, which is what happens when you specialize in a science. I don't believe that Jesus of Lazarus will ever even existed. There's zero evidence for that. There's not a single eyewitness account. That there's nothing in the Roman annals about him. There's no record of an arrest. There's no record of a trial. There's absolutely nothing. And there are far more significant historical figures that have some kind of evidence that they existed. There is absolutely zero. In fact, we actually have unearthed the writings of the Roman consulate when they sat down and decided how to engineer the myth of Christianity to replace the expected warrior messiah of the Palestinians. So Christianity is and always has been a psyop that was completely and totally fabricated by the Romans in order to make people pacifists, easier to control, easier to rule. There is absolutely no reality to it at all whatsoever. Barking up the wrong tree with that Lazarus stuff there. In my opinion, Christianity is the single greatest enemy of humanity that we have ever contended with. And if you use his own words, Jesus said in the Bible, judge a man not by his intent, but by the fruits of his labors. There have been more people killed in the name of Christianity than all of the dictators in human history and all the natural disasters combined, entire cultures genocided. And then also one of the ones that I really, really like is that, you constantly see right wing Christians talking about how Satanists are evil because they sacrifice innocent children. Apparently, they haven't read the New Testament because that's exactly what the God of the New Testament did. He blood sacrifice of his own innocent child. You know what I mean? If that's your definition of evil, then you all worship Satan. It's the craziest thing ever. So yeah, that I got nothing for that. It's nuts. I will say though that the highest teaching possible is to love your neighbor as you would love yourself. But you don't need a Bronze Age myth to inform you of basic morality. My son knows that without being taught it. I didn't have to teach him; he just knows that instinctively. So, yeah. Anyways, uh, I have to go because I have a client in a little while. And I know it's crazy, but he's in Australia, so it's late at night for me, but I think it's 7 in the morning or something for him. So thank you guys so much for spending this time with me. You could be doing anything, but you're here with Illuminati. But then again, I have walked out into the dark ass jungle to come out here and talk to you guys. So what happened? What happened with what? So thank you guys so much for spending this time with me, and I will see you again very soon.